Hi, this is Audra Vaz, and this is my crisis study. Texas A&M and the Bonfire Tragedy. For 90 years, Texas A&M would build a effigy to burn prior to their annual football game against the University of Texas. However, in 1999, the 5-story bonfire structure that they built out of logs collapsed, killing 12 students and injuring 27 other people. This, like I said, the structure had been something that they had done for 90 years and was part of their Aggie spirit. The Texas A&M University are known as the Aggies, and this was called the Aggie Bonfire. So as you can imagine, just so you know, point of reference, it was not lit when it collapsed. It was, as you see here on the left, basically a pile of logs, and the collapse happened at 2 in the morning prior to it ever being ignited. So you can see here in the pictures what it looked like after it collapsed, and then the crosses and things on the right show the names of the folks that passed away. There were 11 students, 1 alumni, and then the other 27 people were staff, alumni, and students. So how did they handle this crisis? Well, Cynthia Lawson was the head of communications for the university at the time, but she was new on the job. She had only been there for 5 months. So she didn't really know much about the Aggie Bonfire. She just knew how to handle communications from her previous job working for Detroit Edison and their energy and nuclear power things. But the parents were their number one public, especially since students died or were injured. So that was their primary focus, was communicating with parents. The university is governed by a board of regents, and Texas A&M, much like App, is part of a multi-university system. They had 12 universities in their system. Of course, the media was all over the tragedy, reporting, trying to get as much information as they could out as quickly as they could. Alumni, faculty, and staff were also a key public for them. But they maintained their mantra and a message of be honest, be accurate, and do not speculate. The Cynthia Lawson provided hourly updates the first day of the tragedy to the media. So on Lawson's team, there were 21 members in the communications department. There were also other public relations types who worked at the university, communications professors, other people with public relations experience, things like that. The university did not have a crisis communication plan, but they did have a critical incident response team, and this was kind of like a phone tree system where people were notified of critical incidents, and then the first responders and things like that were deployed. A member of the crisis team was the Board of Regents, had their own public relations rep who worked with Lawson throughout the process. The president of the university, Bowen, hired or utilized an outside investigator so that this person could also report, to the media or to others, the Board of Regents and parents and other publics, about the crisis from sort of an independent perspective, so that the news wasn't one-sided. They held 4 or 5 news conferences on the very first day alone, and then they continued to hold news conferences as updates were made available throughout the incident following. Their main messages that they kept reiterating was the concern for the parents of the injured and dead students, more about the bonfire tradition, because of course everyone's first response is, well, what do you expect? You're building a 5-6 story structure of logs and lighting it on fire. Something is bound to go wrong. There's a prodrome of epic proportions right there. They provided facts about the incident, and they reinforced the Aggie spirit and the specialness of the university. So Those were sort of the 4 key points that they rolled into all their messages. They did, however, encounter misinformation, problems with the media, and then some negative news stories, cartoons, things of that nature. Some of the fake stories were that students were drunk, and that was part of the problem. That they were unauthorized operators of heavy machinery. They were letting students run the cranes and things like that. So those facts were not true. The person who was in charge of the bonfire build made a guesstimate as to how tall it was, but what hadn't been measured. So his guesstimate was wrong. So these are some of the things that got out in the media. And then, of course, in this 24-hour news cycle we have, the media wants as much information as soon as possible. But Texas A&M had to make sure that parents were notified and that all of their needs were met before they could provide too much information, because a lot of panic set in. You can imagine if your child was a student at the university who you knew was involved with the project, you'd want to know, right away if your child was one of the dead or injured. The university and some of their publics set up websites and TV and radio stations specifically to provide updates. I guess their alumni chapter had a website. They used, similar to App TV, they used their Aggie TV and radio stations to provide updates for people to try and get out as accurate of information as possible, as timely as possible. So at the end of the day, Cynthia Lawson, who was in charge of it, had several lessons that she learned. I had mentioned previously that there are 21 members of her communications team, but throughout the crisis she really only utilized a few of them, and several of the others felt underutilized, and they felt guilty about that because she only employed certain people to do certain things. The public relations folks that I mentioned from throughout campus, she had not utilized them. So in retrospect, she would have utilized their expertise and maybe even used some of them as spokespeople to answer different publics and things like that. It was a very big tragedy, and her staff, suffered some psychological issues, one from, feeling guilty and all that, but the faculty, the staff, the students, they all needed psychological counseling. Immediately, of course, it's very shocking, but then later on, guilt and all those other types of emotions set in. So they realized that just because the crisis is over doesn't mean that the emotional damage is. Lawson said that she would have utilized a couple staff members to monitor the media to help identify those negative stories and falsehoods that were represented or were being told in the media. And they didn't, like I said, they didn't have a crisis communication plan, so they absolutely developed one afterward and rehearsed it regularly. So long story short, the bonfire no longer exists at Texas A&M, even though some of the injured students and even some of the relatives of the dead students said that they would be okay if it continued. So it's kind of that whole point of pride. They were okay with it continuing, but the university felt in the best interest of everybody that they would no longer hold the Aggie bonfire. So 1998 was the actual official year that they lit it on fire. But that has not stopped student groups or students or other folks from having their own bonfires off campus, outside of campus, and things like that. So the university tries to work with them, as far as crisis communications planning goes, in case something goes wrong. Thanks. Have a great day.